So, thank you so much again, Lawrence, for joining me for another podcast.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I had so much fun on the first one, we had to do it again.
So, you reached the final 5 on The Apprentice. How do you think your experience in PR has contributed to your success on the show?
I think massively in a sense, and in some ways not at all. I think the most important thing is it's about knowing how to PR your contribution, because there are so many people in the process for most of the time you're on the show that you've got to know how to PR yourself. And through some of the really difficult moments, something that I always made sure I didn't just say, or I don't know what the edit will look like, but I didn't just say that, oh, I work 110%. I try so hard, because everyone does. Everyone tries their best. Everyone's working really hard. Now, I stood on business and I spoke about what I'd actually done, what I'd created. So I knew how to PR my contribution on every task, which is very important. But then the other thing about PR is it's communications, and communications and your interpersonal skills are everything on a process like this, because who you decide to bring back, or if people decide to bring you back, if you're got a certain relationship with them, you might get out of trouble when actually you might have been someone that they did want to bring back. So for all of these reasons, there's lots of opportunities to really use those communication skills, whether it's on camera or it's off camera. But it's about making sure you're using your PR to PR yourself the way you would a client's work, your own work and contribution. And then from the other side of it as well, just using sort of communication skills to, build relationships and, do all the important stuff. But yeah, it definitely had a say, but, there's lots about it that comes from all sort of walks of my life that really made a difference.
And I'd also like to ask you, when you made it to the final 5 in The Apprentice, what did it mean to you on a personal level?
I mean, it was beyond belief. It was beyond belief. It was in that moment, I was like, I've got what I wanted. Once you get to the final 5 of the show, barring any disasters, you're usually in every episode of the series. So the experience for me was complete. I knew I was going to be, whether I made the final or didn't make the final, I was going to be in every episode. I was going to live out the full experience, because it isn't something you get to do again. Secondly, the visibility between the candidate who comes just before the final 5 and being in the final 5, there's a huge gap in visibility that you get by being in that final 5, the press and all the rest of it, the opportunities that come with being in the final 5. And I just knew from that moment that the reason, or one of the reasons I went on the show, was about the visibility to, as someone that works in an industry that speaks to the media so much and, encourages clients to put themselves out there. I was now going to really have that platform that, I wanted to build for myself, to actually go out there and make a difference and say, actually, here's what I believe about the industry, and actually talk about politics and talk about the things that matter to me. So it was just that realization of, in a flash, in those results being read out, my life had changed. And there's very few moments in your life where everything changes with sort of just a click of your fingers in those results being read out. And I went to the toilet in the studio, and I just sat there with my hands on my head. I was just I can't believe it. You work so hard. And I think when you go on the show, no one talks about the finalists. Everyone talks, as in the candidates, they talk about the final 5, who's going to be in the final 5. And I think that's everyone's dream. Everyone's dream is to get to the final 5. And, for me, the business was, and my business plan was important to me, but the personal benefits of getting to that was beyond belief. So just gratitude, sort of real pinch me moment, and just I've done it. It was an incredible feeling.
And the traditional thing about the final 5 is the interviewing stage. So how was it like being interviewed, being on the show, and going through all of that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I loved it. Because I was talking about a subject I knew loads about. Now, it was a little bit difficult because you've not looked at your business plan in 2.5 months. You've been on the show at that point for literally 2 months. So many things are going on in your head in that 2 months. So many memories, so many experiences, everything is in your head now since you last looked at that business plan. And I had a long business plan. So I did, and I was completely upfront about this. I was using AI and technology and automation and smart engineering, and I wanted to make sure that was in the business plan. So, it was a long business plan because I looked at every single interview stage. What do candidates traditionally miss out? What do they get picked up on? And I had answers prepared for everything. But I couldn't learn every single number. I had a spreadsheet with 4,000 cells on it. So if you said, right, what are your recruitment costs going to be year 3, month 11? I had 4,000 cells of things to remember, and I had about 20 minutes to look at my business plan to prep. And one of the only things they said to me was we're not going to test you on the numbers. I get into my first interview, and the first thing Mike asked me is about one of my numbers. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. I've had so much go on in the last couple of months. I was like, oh. So it is tough, and you've got a lot that you've got to try and remember. But I loved it. I really, really loved it. It's the one thing, when you're talking about a product on the show that you've created, when you're talking about your tour and a tree in the desert when we were in Egypt and all of these kind of things, they're not you. And the thing you know most about is you and your business plan. And a lot of the interviews is about getting to know you as the individual. And I really got to speak about my beliefs, my business, me as Lawrence, and I loved it. I had a really good time, and I love talk. I've never not enjoyed an interview. And listen, they were tough. But I'll tell you one thing, and this is a funny story. And I hope that when I've seen the edit back, that it sort of reflects this. They were desperate for me to be upset when my interviews, some of them didn't go so great. They were desperate, and the cameraman's got me sort of pinned in the elevator, that wasn't so good. How are you feeling? That must be really tough to take. And I was like, I'm all right. I'm fine. I was like, life goes on. You win some, you lose some. I was just enjoying the experience. And obviously, when you're in there, you got to give it your most, and you got to, really fight for yourself. But then after that, I was like, I enjoyed it. You win some, you lose some. Not everyone's going to love you. Not everyone's going to back the ideas you made. I believe in it. If they don't believe in it, that's absolutely fine. There's plenty of people who've been on the show who have gone after the show and, been very successful. And there's plenty of people who have made it to the end of the show who haven't ended up being successful afterwards. So everything is what you make of it. And I was just I was just happy to be there. I was having a good time. I was doing something that I was just grateful that I'd got to that stage. So I was like, you know what? It is what it is. And yeah, I just wouldn't let anything get me down.
And it's incredible that you say that. I've actually heard that Mike is one of the toughest interviewers on the show. So what was your experience like being interviewed by him?
Mike is tough, but he's very fair. He's very, very, very fair. And that was the one thing I found about him. It was like a boxing match with Mike. You're throwing your punch back and he's throwing, and it's literally what it felt like. It felt like a verbal fight of not in a bad way, but, he was, giving you the question, which was a punch, and then you had to respond back. And it's really what you're sparring, not in a way we're trying to land a knockout blow on anyone, because that's not what it's about. It's about really testing you to your limits, and actually, how do you back yourself up and how do you fight? And I really felt like going into the interviews, I had two choices. I felt like I could either really just eat humble pie and just, be spoken down to, because some of it is really talking down to you a little bit, or I could really stand on business and I could fight for it. And I knew I would never ever forgive myself if I didn't just fight as hard as I could fight. So yeah, I had to give it really, really hard back. But Mike was very fair. He had done his research. He was a lot of fun as well. I don't know if this is included, but he gave me 3 pictures of Lord Sugar and asked me to identify which ones were AI. And one of them, Lord Sugar's knee, I don't know what happened with it. I correctly identified the other 2, but it just looked a little bit skewed, and I don't know if it was the camera or the lighting or whatever. So I was like, I'm really not sure about this one. I think this one is real, but there's just something about the knee area that strikes me as, because AI has a bit of a problem with proclivities and fingers and all the rest of it. So I wasn't sure if it could be that. And Mike said to me that he was going to tell Lord Sugar that I think he has weird knees. So I don't. It was just a weird picture, but no, I thought Mike was very fair. I think he'd done his research, and I can always respect that. If someone has done their research and they don't like something, it's my job to try and make them like it. But it's, I thought that he liked aspects of it, and he went away and he got opinions from people like Andrew Bloch, who is an industry luminary who I put in my business plan. And you know, one of the funny things he said, he was like, I spoke to Andrew, and I was like, oh, that's nice. And he was like, he said he's never heard of you. Now, I have a bone to pick, because I caught up with Andrew, actually, and Andrew said that he did remember me because I'd met him before, and he was like, I was looking for your business card when he found out I was on the show, so he did remember me. So I don't know what that one was about. I was like, in fairness, Andrew is like top of the game. This is a guy that is... I wouldn't expect anyone to know me. Like, I spoke to Richard Branson about your business plan. He said he's never heard of you. I was like, I wouldn't expect Richard Branson to know who I am. So that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and he's a great interviewer. And it was a hell of an experience.
And what friendships have you developed with some of the other candidates? Have you developed any lasting friendships with any of them?
I would say with all of them. Genuinely, there are some brilliant people in the process, and I take the view with a lot of friendships that friendships are not about always how much you see each other, especially adult friendships and relationships. Sometimes it's just the bond you've built and the relationship that you have with the individual, that you can go 3, 6, 12 months, years without speaking to people, but you just know you've got that relationship that you will pick it up and you will sort of carry it on from there. And I think with pretty much all of the candidates, I think, we've shared a bond that, whether we pick up our relationship, even if after the show we don't have reason to chat to each other for 3 or 6 months, we would stay friends. Now, I would say that, people in particular that I've got really close with is Harry and Priyesh. Absolutely love those two. They have become really good friends. Kieran, absolute hero of our times. Kieran knew what he was doing on the show, and I think everyone should know that. Like, Kieran knew the character he was going to be portrayed as, and he played up to it brilliantly. And he is a showman of all top showmen. Like, he knew what he was doing the whole way through. And there was sometimes I'd be filming with him, and we knew he was having a laugh. He would be slagging people off to the high heavens. And he like, as soon as the camera would be off, he'd give one of us a cheeky smile, because he just knew exactly what he was doing. And I love him, and I see Kieran quite a lot. And then, really with everyone, but Karishma as well is someone that I've got really close with. She is a really good friend, a brilliant person, and someone that, I hope to get to do a lot of work with in the future. And, I hope, and I always believe that my trajectory will continue to go upwards, You've got to believe that, as a business person, you've got to believe that the best is always yet to come. And, with Karishma, I absolutely see that trajectory for her. But also just as a person, we aligned really closely, very similar values. And, she's someone that I can see myself staying friends with for a very long time. So I'd say everyone, those 3 or 4 people, I know I've forgotten someone, and I'm going to look back at this and I'm going to be like, I can't believe I didn't mention that person. But no, I'd say off the top of my head, just those 3 or 4, like, very, very close friends, but all of them, definitely shared a bond with.
And it's interesting because, so is the character that Kieran plays just an act? Is he completely different off camera than he is on camera?
No, he's not completely different. He knows what he's like. He's a fantastically self-aware character. Like, the one thing that might come across is like, oh, he's cocky or he's this. He knows who he is. He's not unaware and he's not thick. Kieran is a smart guy. And he played into it brilliantly. And, that might be one of the reasons they kept him in. Like, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. And he was such a brilliant character and he had so much energy. He could have just been cocky, let's say, and just cocky and not entertaining, but because he leaned into it so much and because he had so much fun with it, just that cheeky smile after he'd done something or he'd been a bit naughty or said something that was a little bit ooh, but like he'd just give you a wink or something. You actually see it on camera a few times. There you go, like that. It does get caught a few times. And I would say Kieran was also one of those people there that was having a lot of fun, like a lot of fun. Like, you would have seen this in the Isle of Wight. We were cleaning goat shit, man. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's not every candidate would have done that. But Kieran absolutely was. And we were having such a good time. And he was petrified of goats. And we're in there cleaning goat shit and mucking it out and all the rest of it, because he had that love of life and like all the rest of it. So he knew his character. He's fantastically self-aware. And yeah, he played into it. But, I know my character, and I could have been, a more reserved version of that character. But what's the point? I better be out there on the market, giving it my all. And, that builds me as me.
That's amazing. And I'd also like to ask, in terms of, the final, you didn't make it through to the final, but what do you think, why do you think people should watch the final, and what do you think people will learn from the final 5 experience?
I think the thing that's really important is some people, it's accepting that what you've got sometimes is enough. So this is like something you would say not being in the final. So I'm sort of aware of that. There's a very old famous English expression from the Profumo affair of, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? After Profumo denied that he was having an affair, he said, oh, it didn't. And then they, interviewed the lady he'd been having the affair with, and he said, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? And I'm obviously not in the final, so I would say that, I was at peace with it. But I really was. From the moment I got into the final 5, I had got one way or another what I was wanting out of the show. So when it came to the prize, my heart was in the business, but it was whether it was exactly the right time. And I was starting to think, I've got in the next sort of couple of years that I want to build. I want to go traveling before we have kids. And if I've got imagine going to Lord Sugar and telling him, oh, I want to go away for like 6 to 12 weeks to go traveling before I start a family, because I know for the next, 25 years, we won't have the opportunity to just go away and see the world for a few months. And time is very limited. And I was like, well, that's in my head. And then the next thing was, well, 250,000, I think if you look at it now, when that prize was first introduced, it's now like 440,000 adjusted for inflation, but the price hasn't moved. And I had a tech business, and I knew that the investment that it would need to give away that much equity, was it necessarily the right thing for my business? And just with all of these things playing around, and it was just like, is this the right time? I'm sure everyone watching this has probably had this feeling at some point in their life. I felt the sense of achievement by getting to the final 5. And then as soon as that sense of achievement, I'm someone that always looks to the next thing. I think it's maybe I'm a little bit ADHD, and in fact, I'm pretty sure I'm ADHD. You're always looking to the next thing. You celebrate your wins for maybe not as long as you should, and then you're always looking at the next thing. And I got to the final 5 and I felt this pit in my stomach. And I was just like, my sense was just telling me that like winning isn't for me right now. And whether it was maybe the amount of the investment, what the prize is Lord Sugar's network. Let's not make any mistake here. This is a man who knows absolutely everybody and anybody, and the authority that being partnered with Lord Sugar gives you, it's like being on a Forbes list. This is a man who is at the top of the game, and his endorsement of you as a business is worth more than 250. It's worth more than 5 million. It's, the money's, completely out the question here. But it was like, well, I think my network and the network I'll get from the show will build. Will it be anything that's a scratch on Lord Sugar? No. So for me, Karishma is just phenomenal. She is the best candidate on the show this year, and it is not close for me. So there is no one I'm slagging off by saying this. There are lots of very competent, brilliant business people that were on the show this year. Karishma is a class above. She was project manager twice, the only candidate this year to win twice as project manager. She was like sub-team 4 or 5 times, and she only lost once, and it wasn't her fault when she lost. She's just brilliant. She's just absolutely brilliant. And this is not to take anything away from Pasha. Obviously, I think you see through the interview stages that maybe Pasha's business plan wasn't quite as developed as Karishma's was. We don't know the outcome of the final. And I think that's going to be incredibly interesting to watch of someone that was just the best candidate and does have a business that's already established versus someone with potential, which is, the reason why I think, you're seeing Pasha in the final is the potential that, the interviewers have seen in Pasha, which is fantastic. And, she's done brilliantly to get this far. So, I think that's kind of what you're watching for. It's against established and, you know, a candidate that was really a star throughout the process versus, you know, potential and an industry. You know, I know Lord Sugar's got experience with skincare, but also he's got a lot of experience with recruitment. So, you know, the industries as well and how that plays off against each other. All I can say is that the final is an absolute corker. I really, really would not miss it. And just by being a part of the process, I felt like I'd fulfilled my goal. I got to be in the final. I'm in 12 out of 12 episodes. So I was at peace with the outcome regardless. If I'd been there, I would have obviously been delighted as an achievement of making the final. But I was at peace, and I think it gave me the freedom to do a lot after the show that you can't start or do anything with your business until the show is over. So it just gave me the peace that I knew I could sort of move on with my life and start building what I wanted to build as soon as the show was over. So I kind of, at that moment, I'd got everything I wanted from the experience, and I was just happy to be there, man.
But it's incredible you say that, because one thing that I found from The Apprentice is that some of the candidates that got out before, like in the final 5, have actually turned out more successful sometimes than some of the winners. I think there's this guy called Thomas. I can't remember his surname.
Skinner.
That's it.
Tom Skinner. He went out episode 9. A lot of the candidates sort of knew that I did my research before I went in. It was episode 9, season 15, I want to say. So
something like that, yeah.
And Lord Sugar said to him as well, he was like, if I was going to war, you'd be who I'd pick, but we're not going to war, and for that reason you're fired, or something along the lines like that. I think Thomas Skinner is absolutely brilliant. I talk a lot about this, about authenticity and communications. He's so brilliantly authentic, and he's someone that people can resonate with. And I'd love to do some stuff with him. By the time this is airing, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I've got to do maybe some market selling or collabs with him, which would be really cool. He's someone that I've actually met him before on a market, and he's just brilliant. He's box office, and what he's created is phenomenal since the show. But I think there was 2 things about that. One thing was actually going back to the final when I got there and speaking to the candidates who hadn't made the final. I hadn't almost realised the mental impact of going back home and wondering, like, what am I missing out on? You know, I get really bad FOMO when I don't do stuff, and what a tremendous privilege it was to have made the final or final 5, and to have been in every episode and not to have had that experience, because you don't get to do The Apprentice again. It's a once in a lifetime experience, and you know, we only get so much time here, and to get to be a part of that whole experience is incredible, and to just be there was brilliant. And also, you know, regardless of where you come in the process, these are smart business people who will go on to do brilliant things, you know, whether it's in what they're doing now or new business ventures or anywhere in the future. And, you know, yeah, I completely agree with you. You know, it was just nice for me that I got to that stage, but, you know, it doesn't necessarily matter where you finish in the process, because there's only one winner. And it's just about giving yourself a good show. And if people are comfortable with how they've done, then brilliant.
Thank you so much. And just out of interest, because your company's so investable, so why was it particularly The Apprentice that appealed to you rather than Dragon's Den?
It's an interesting one, actually. I think it was the experience of the show. So my cousin has actually been on Dragon's Den. So my cousin Joe Wolf got investment from Peter Jones. He got like £50,000 from Peter Jones. For me, being a part of the show and proving my credibility through the process as a whole was, you know, the big thing for me. And then also the other side of it is I knew people who had been on the show, and just my understanding of what the show would look like, and I wouldn't know how to get onto Dragon's Den, whereas I had a little bit more of a clue. So, you know, I'm friendly with Trey Lowe and Steve Darkham from season 18 and a few others as well. And actually just the insight that I got from having friends who have been on the show, you can't underestimate that in a process like The Apprentice. And, you know, obviously the end goal is still the same. It's investment in a business. And I appreciate you saying my business is investable. I think you know, for me, it was about finding things that aren't working and fixing them. And that's something I've always been passionate about. And then moving forward, regardless of what I do, whether it's with the business plan as I took it in, or whether my business as it is now, you know, the tech side of thing is still there, ready to take off. It's just about making things better. And, you know, whether that's in people's lives or anything else, it doesn't matter too much. As long as I'm making things better, chef's kiss.
And if there was anyone you could work with, you know, in the capacity of Rosenberg.Media, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. There's a few people. You're really wanting to look at like the elite of PR, so and communications. So I would say people like Andrew Bloch, of course. He's someone who's done, phenomenal things. There's also just some really cool communicators out there, from both sides of the political spectrum, and working with them. I would love to be more in with the political circles. I still do a lot of stuff in Parliament. I did week 3. I did a launch, a watch party in the House of Lords, and that was really cool. But I think it's just about working with, excellent communicators, regardless. It's not necessarily for me about like individuals. I've never been someone to overly focus on role models, because you get let down by people, because nobody's perfect. And I think it's good to look at people who've been successful. So, we spoke about Andrew. There's a guy I work with called Justin Doherty, and he is, worked in public affairs and PR, and the impact he's had on everyday people's lives through the campaigns he's worked on is tremendous. And, I'm very grateful to work with people like that. Richard Merrin, who was my previous boss, he's built up a company, and, we speak about Andrew Bloch, his old agency, Frank PR, is on the floor above Spreckley. So, we're looking at a really successful PR business leader who's kept an agency through and grown an agency through the thick and thin of the last, all of the turmoil of the last like 20 years. And he's built it out from there. So, successful business leaders and people who have a story to tell. And certainly within the political space, how do I work with, powerful communicators? For me, everything is not always just about money. I believe if you do a good job, money will come, and the interest from people who, want to do good things is more important. And then money will come. If you're good at what you do, you'll get spotted by the right people, and those opportunities will come. And yeah, I think it's kind of that, the elite communicators, where regardless of industry and regardless of, what they do, working with them and, learning from them, profoundly impactful.
So beyond the Apprentice, what's next for you? What's the next big thing you'll be doing?
So I want to really keep it going, to be honest with you. So in conversation with a few broadcast channels at the moment, and I would absolutely love to be one of two things. One, an industry spokesperson, so someone who speaks on behalf of PR, not as a person that is representative of the whole industry. You've got people out there like now, like Marina Perkis, who speaks from a very partisan standpoint, and there's some others as well. I think it's a guy called, last name like Stefankovic or something along those lines, and they're very partisan and they have their views. So it's not necessarily being a whole industry spokesperson, but someone from the industry that is a spokesperson, because there is sort of a lack of those. So someone, we look at the budget from last year when Rachel Reeves was talking about like a smorgasbord of tax rises. I was on LBC writing about, why that kind of language is so unhelpful. So I think it's about being someone now that is a representative from the industry. And it's also about, I have my views. I have, views on the way the country should be run. And, I want to do things that should make people's lives better. And if I look at someone like Trey has now got a regular slot on GB News, and he's putting his opinions out there week after week. And that's the kind of thing I would like to do. I would like to be someone that I have a view, I have a sort of decent scope of understanding of these things. So it's about trying to use this platform that I've got now to continue building from it. The Apprentice is going to be over soon. And, I have two choices. I either sort of fade away from here, or I keep trying to build. And, from the conversations I've been having, I've been very fortunate that, I'm swamped with work, which is a phenomenal position to be in. But now the question is, okay, so work is good, and I want to do more keynote speaking, talking about sort of, communications of the subjects I'm passionate about, more media training. So we have more people out there who are delivering real messages, not just sort of pivoting and, prepared to answer for the worst, really getting their messages out there and moving the dial. Clients will always be clients, that kind of thing. But, to really continue with my personal profile, because it's not just about using or being someone that people know, it's about using that profile for the good. So if I can do that and I can continue building from there, it would be an honor and a pleasure. So let's keep fingers crossed that someone keeps keeps wanting to hear from me, because that would be a pleasure. So yeah, fingers crossed.
Thank you so much for recording this very special podcast with me, Lawrence.
It's a pleasure. It's been honestly so much fun, and thank you for doing 2 with me. I mean, it's enough that people have to listen to me once, and now they've got to listen to me twice. But no, it's such a pleasure, and you are a real gen. And as we would say in Yiddish, you're a mensch. I think that's Yiddish, but yeah, you're a real hero, and it's been a pleasure doing this. So thank you again, Micah.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Cheers.
Thank you.